Socialism does not work because it's contradictory to human nature. Simple as that. Human beings are self interested beings. Self interest does not mean selfish. There's a difference. The difference between selfishness and self interest is that when you're self interested, you pursue your goal, but you're not hurting anyone. You're just very focused on what you need to get done and you make sure you achieve your goal. Selfishness is the same thing, but at the expense of others.
Germinal, thank you so much for joining me again.
Thanks, RT. I'm really happy to be back on your platform. It's a true honor.
Yeah, man, happy to have you here. So you're the founder and editor-in-chief of GGV Publishing. You're an award-winning author. Anyone who's not familiar with you, anything else you want people to know before we go on?
I think what you said is pretty accurate. I'm also an economist and pretty much a scholar. I have a degree in political science, and I've been writing a lot about the political, economic, and social issues of our time. So
Yeah.
yeah, pretty much that's what I do.
Yeah, your book, the Thomas Sowell book. Do I say his name right?
Yeah,
Because
Thomas Sowell, yeah.
everyone I hear say his name, it sounds like soul, Soul,
Yeah,
rather than the soul.
yeah.
Is that pretty normal?
That I don't know. I actually find it interesting that they say everyone pronounces soul instead of Sowell.
Mm-hmm.
So for people who come across his work for the very first time, they're gonna say Thomas Sowell. But then
Yeah.
when you watch his interviews on Uncommon Knowledge, everyone says Dr. Sowell, Thomas Sowell, and then you just go along with it.
Yeah, and you won an award for that book last year,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Uh, Best in political science
Yeah,
or
best
what
best indie book award in biography.
biography? Okay,
Yeah.
the Little Red Book. Somebody else, one
Yeah,
of
the
your
Little Red Book. Yeah, one of the authors of GGV Publishing won the same award, but for political science, history, and economics.
awesome. Well, congratulations to both of you. That's
Thank you,
amazing.
appreciate it.
So, um, one thing I want to ask you about early is Bitcoin
Sure.
because when we talked last, you don't believe in it. I'd imagine
Mhm.
your views are pretty much the same, but I'm just curious. We're in a bull market now, and there's more hype than there was
Mhm.
a year ago, as bull markets always tend to go.
Mhm.
So, has your opinion on it changed at all?
No, not
No.
even a single bit.
Yeah.
Personally, to me, it doesn't matter whether Bitcoin reach even $1 billion or a trillion, even a quadrillion dollars. To be honest, I
Yeah.
will not put a single dime in it because it has no intrinsic value. You will probably rebut by saying, well, but the dollar doesn't either. And you're right, the dollar doesn't. But the thing with Bitcoin is that it's just my opinion.
Yeah.
It's pure speculation. I could be wrong. And but my thing with Bitcoin is that it is all based on hype. It's based on the greatest fool theory. So you always want to sell it to someone else for a higher price. But the thing is that it's not something that produces something on its own. If, for example, you own a farm, with a farm, you can produce agricultural commodities. You can put it to rent. Like tenants, like sharecroppers, will use it to grow food and stuff. It produces something. But Bitcoin produces nothing. It's all, to me, like it's just a code created and people decide to put value to it. But there's nothing you can really do with it. Some would say, yeah, but no, the real value of Bitcoin is in the blockchain. Maybe. I don't know. But to me, like it's not based on anything, and the downside are unlimited compared to the upside. So long as people are still hyped about it, that's where, at least to me, its value is, and it will keep growing, and people will keep putting money. But the minute people actually lose faith in Bitcoin, it's done.
Mm.
Now, when you look at the US dollar, why the US dollar? has so much value, although it is based on nothing. The US dollar has so much value because of the track record the United States established in the world. The United States managed to become the first economic power in the 19th century by displacing or replacing Great Britain. Then it became the major political power after World War II. So when you have a country like this dominating politically, economically, militarily, and it tells you that its currency is actually the best that can supply everyone else, people will actually put faith in it because the track record backs it. That's what actually gives the real value of the dollar, although the dollar is based on the government bonds. It's just a promise to repay the debt. We know that they're not going to repay the debt. The debt keeps increasing.
Yeah.
But that's what gives value to the dollar. Let me give you an example. I think I gave that same example on the last time I was on your podcast. But when I used to travel to see my dad in Tanzania, I used to live in Kenya for a bit, and that's where I learned English. I would take the bus from Nairobi to Arusha, and at the border, I would have to pay the visa to go to Tanzania, and I pay for that visa in dollars, in US dollars. In Kenya, you have the Kenyan shilling. In Tanzania, you have the Tanzanian shilling. I could not use any of those. I have to use the dollar, which is, the US currency. So that
Mhm.
shows that people trust it. So that's the major difference between why the US dollar, although it has no intrinsic value, still still has value in people's eyes because of the United States track record compared to Bitcoin, which is simply codes, computer codes that people assign value to it. I understand there's some upside to it, like such as decentralization. The Federal Reserve of the central bank cannot, like try to centralize it. So those aspects matter. Don't get me wrong, but I think the downside are much higher than the upside because
Mhm.
at the end of the day, and plus Bitcoin has a limited supply. But to me, it's a limited supply of nothing. So that's why it's true Bitcoin is about to hit $100,000, maybe higher than that. But as I say, even if it reach a quadrillion, I'm not putting money in it because to me, Bitcoin doesn't. It's all based on hype, and hype is not a reliable indicator of making a sound investment.
I can understand the hype argument. When it comes to the dollar, it's kind of interesting because while the dollar has value, that value has decreased throughout its entire
Mhm.
lifespan.
Yeah.
Like it, I mean, if you looked at even if you started in 2008 when Bitcoin started,
Hmm.
if you look at those two charts, they're going to be opposites, right?
Absolutely.
Bitcoin is just going to be an upward trajectory with some downturns and
Yeah.
stuff like that. But the dollar,
Hmm.
its value is just a relative value. Like its value is like it's more value relative to other fiat
Yeah.
currencies that are decreasing in value as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah.
The dollar just decreases a little bit slower,
Hmm.
and it has more. I mean, we have uh, people buy oil in dollars, stuff like that. So there's a
Yeah.
lot of economy based around the dollar,
Hmm.
but I don't see the dollar as having any intrinsic value. I compare Bitcoin more to gold. Like I
Hmm.
think the value of gold, you can do stuff with it, but
Hmm.
mostly it's just the scarcity. I
Yeah. The
think that's what
scarcity.
makes Bitcoin gold, and that's what makes gold valuable,
Yeah. Hmm.
and I believe that's what makes Bitcoin valuable too.
Yeah.
Although you know, Bitcoin will probably get to, in my opinion, 120, 150, $200,000 before the market crashes, and then it's going to drop down. I don't know, 50 to $75,000, depending on how high it goes.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of the cycle of it. And I think it'll go back up eventually. In 4 years, we'll be talking, and we'll possibly be talking about a $500,000 Bitcoin, something like that. So, yeah, I do think it has value,
Hmm.
but I mean, I completely respect your opinion on
No,
it
of
too. I was
course.
just
Yeah.
curious with the market.
Yeah. Because at
So,
the end of the day, the reason why um, the discussion around Bitcoin cannot be unanimous is because it's speculative.
Yeah.
I'm speculating that it doesn't have any value. You speculate that it has value. So it's something like we can agree to disagree because it's based on how we see it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so it's all speculative because every financial market is speculative to some extent,
Yeah.
right? But there's some um, assets, even though we speculate about them, we know that we can agree on some basic principles, right? For
Yeah.
example, you and I can agree that gold has value because of its scarcity. It's a precious metal.
Yeah.
So regardless of how much gold would increase, I can say, oh, gold will increase to $5,000 an ounce. You say, no, it's going to increase to 10. You're speculating, I'm speculating. We disagree on that. But we both know that gold is going to increase regardless because it has intrinsic value. And the intrinsic value of gold is its scarcity. It's a precious
Mm.
metal. It's the
Yeah.
same for for agricultural commodities. As I say, if you own a farm, you know that eventually its value will go up because it produced something. How much the value will go up, that's why we speculate. But we know that it's
Hmm.
going to go up because of the intrinsic value it has.
Yeah. Well, I'm happy you pointed out that most markets are speculative because it's
Absolutely.
absolutely true.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, Tesla stock has gone up significantly since the election, and it's like nothing has actually changed with the company.
Nope.
It's just people saying, "Oh, he's kind of in Trump's inner circle,
Yeah.
and because of that, there's going to be some benefit to the company," and
Yeah.
people are just speculating, but there's nothing in writing. There's nothing concrete at all
It's
to
called
base that off.
the financialization of markets. It's
Yeah,
when the value of an asset grows. No, not the value. It's when the price of an asset grows far above its intrinsic value. As you say,
mm,
right? Nothing has significantly changed within Tesla. But the price of the stock has increased because of Elon Musk, because of
yeah,
what he represents, the brands that he represents. That's why, otherwise, the production of Tesla cars has not dramatically increased. Like, or uh, Tesla board did not decide on a new pair of equipment to add to the cars, right? There's no intrinsic value that has increased, right? There's nothing else that they
yeah,
added to the product to make it more valuable. It's just based on market sentiment. Elon Musk made a bet that paid off, and now like everyone, and so now everyone jumped in it to make a quick buck. So that's what's going on, and it's just greed because
yeah.
in financial markets the two sentiments that dominate financial markets are fear and greed. Right now, it's greed, and then
Hmm.
when things we start thinking, it will be fear.
Yeah, yeah. Those are definitely the two emotions that
Yeah.
regulate markets. I mean, I've been in crypto since 2017, and I've gone through those. Um, like when I first got into crypto,
Mhm.
I got in during the greed period.
Yeah.
So I watched, let's say a $20,000 investment go down to $10,000 of value afterward. But I wrote it out, and it, usually,
Mhm.
as long as the market isn't going to zero,
Yeah.
you're usually going to benefit from writing out those ways. It's
Mhm.
it's interesting uh, watching people react to markets now because it's like Bitcoin. Let's say it goes up to $100,000, and people are like, they think it's going to go to 150, but then it drops like it just did. I think it's at 92 or something
The,
right
the
now.
the the reason why I even don't believe that markets can practically go to zero is because so long as human beings exist, they will always exchange.
Yeah,
All you need is two individuals exchanging what they own to have a market,
yeah, I agree with that.
and that's it. So yes, investment value will certainly go down. That happens all the time, but it never hit rock bottom. It has never
Yeah,
happened. Like the Great Depression was arguably the worst in mankind, and yet people like Joe P. Kennedy Sr. became a millionaire out of it. So that
yeah,
tells you everything you need to know. Like there are always some people who are actually looking for downturns to make profitable investments. So there are people who always short the market, and we need short sellers. It's part of being in a capitalist society. It's part of being in the market. There's
Yeah.
You always believe that at some point the value of a company will tank. Now you got to make sure that it hits the number that you targeted. Otherwise, you're gonna lose, and that's what happened to that hedge fund called LTCM. I don't know if you heard about it, but
Mm-mm.
so LTCM was a
Are they
it,
the AMC or not the AMC? The ones that were buying GameStop?
oh no. So LTCM, that was like in the late '90s. So it was a hedge fund of academics. They were
Mm.
like very advanced mathematicians, physicists, and they were buying bonds, government bonds that they were pretty much short selling it. And those guys would do all sort of sophisticated quantitative analysis to determine how investments would go. And they were shorting the Russian, I think they were shorting the US bond.
Mm.
And what happened was that the bond of the Russian government declined. So all the Russian oligarchs and the wealthy Russians moved to the US. I mean, not physically, but they start buying U.S.
Yeah.
bonds. So the value of U.S. bonds keep increasing. And it's because they short sell the U.S. bond, they were losing the investment to the point that the whole hedge fund blew up. And the
Mm.
Federal Reserve had to step in to prevent an entire financial crisis because of
Yeah.
LTCM. Yeah, you should definitely look them up whenever you have time. In fact, two Nobel winners used to own like that hedge fund.
Yeah.
Yeah, they won the Nobel Prize in 1997.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah. There has to be short sellers for a market, right? Because if there's no short sellers, there's nobody can buy in, right? Because all the everything is just being hoarded.
Yeah,
And I think if you enter a market with no intention of ever shorting a stock or crypto or anything, then you're really just signing up to be a bag holder when people do short it, aren't you?
well, it all depends on what strategy you have. Because, for
Mm.
example, a guy like Warren Buffett is someone who almost never short stocks. I mean, he knows
Yeah.
how to short stock, but he doesn't do it because he is extremely patient. He knows that 10, 20 years down the road, the stocks that he invested in will produce the results that he expect them to produce. So when you have that kind of mindset, all you do is wait. You just wait. That's
Yeah.
it. You buy the shares. You wait. When the shares drop, perfect. You buy more of them. They're basically at a discount. That's what will happen on Friday for most people when they go Black Friday shopping. They will
Yeah.
start buying stuff at a discount price. So
Yeah.
it's the opportunity to even buy more shares when the stock of the company you invested in drop instead of selling it. So basically short selling is not necessary. I mean, for you, like if you don't know how to short sell something, don't do it because it is risky. You can actually
Mm.
lose because you pretty much borrow money to actually short sell something. Because if it doesn't work out, you're gonna owe way more.
Yeah.
So it's yeah. So that's why sometimes it's better to just use your long positions. You buy the stock, you wait. If the price drops, you buy more shares, and you wait until it goes. In fact, like people like Warren Buffett, the reason why they never sell, or not never, but almost never sell their stocks is because they use it as collateral,
Mm.
to take on loans for whatever they want to do. Because
Yeah.
loans are always tax free, so that's really why. It's because if you sell it, there's a big tax bill that you're gonna have to pay, capital gains tax that you're gonna have to pay at the end of the year. So you just hold the stock, it keeps increasing in value. You go to the bank, say, hey, I want to borrow, I don't know, $1 million. This is my portfolio. My portfolio is worth 3 million. The bank will say, okay, so long as your portfolio doesn't drop below 2.5 million, you're good. This is the money, and that's how it goes.
Yeah. When it comes to short selling, I know what you're speaking about is when you basically you're basically buying someone's shares at a future lower price or something like that. When if you just own an asset or a stock and you sell it with a plan of repurchasing it later at a lower price, is that also short selling?
Pretty
Just
much, yeah.
without leverage?
Yeah, pretty
Okay.
much, yeah. Yeah, and that's how short sellers do. But again,
Yeah.
it's really tricky. Like I know how to do it, but I never did it because my risk tolerance is not as aggressive.
Yeah.
Because it's at the end of the day, you don't know. What if the thing tanks? Short sellers are people who have a pretty high risk tolerance, or even
Yeah.
people who use options in general, whether it's call or puts. Like you have like a price target, and you believe that the stock is actually going to hit that target. If it doesn't, it's problematic because now you're
Yeah.
gonna owe more than you have, and that's why a lot of people become what we call over leverage. And
Hmm.
over leverage is what kills very smart people who are in financial markets. It's because they get really overconfident about the investment, but at the end of the day, it's something you don't control. And if it doesn't
Yeah.
hit your target, you're in trouble.
Are options and futures the same thing?
No, they're not. So futures, it's mainly used with commodities. That's how you invest in commodities. You use futures.
Okay.
So basically, the thing with futures is that you purchase the commodity at this price, and you say that no matter what the price is in at a certain date in the future, it will not affect the price at which you bought it. That's the point of having
Mm.
futures. It's like so that you set a date and a price, and then it won't affect. And when the price of the commodity either increase or decrease, it will not affect that the price that you agreed to purchase that commodity. That's how futures pretty much work. They're
Got
really
it. So
complicated financial instruments.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been looking at them a little bit, but they're kind of above my head right now. So it's basically there's futures for Bitcoin and stuff like that on Coinbase. So if I if I said, oh, I want to purchase Bitcoin at $95,000 tomorrow, let's say I'm going to buy one Bitcoin, I would be contractually obligated to buy that Bitcoin at 95. And where my profit and loss is if the price is higher, then I made money. If the price is lower, then I lost money. Is that right?
Um, yeah, pretty much. If you put it that way, yeah, because yeah, there's and that's the thing. It's a futures contract. So
Yeah.
yeah, so you buy it at this price. If it goes above, it's not that you. Yeah, you kind of lose money because you could have made that money. If you reach like whatever price, you could have made it. But at the same time, you also don't know. So you say like, and if it goes below that, you'd have also lost more money. So at the
Yeah.
same time, you're like, okay, that's the price to which we agreed upon, and you said I'm buying this at 90,000, and if Bitcoin hits 100K, well, you
Yeah.
you technically it's not like you lost, because let's say that Bitcoin is at 80K, right, and you make a futures contract saying that it's going to hit 90, like you buying it at 90K, but the thing
Yeah.
goes to 100. Sure, you made profit because it hit your target, but it went above your target. So there's still an additional 10K that you missed. So it's not like you
Mm.
necessarily lost, but you could have made more.
That makes sense. That
Yeah.
makes sense. Cool. So we had an election not too long ago, a few weeks ago, and I'd imagine you're fairly happy with the result of that, right? Um,
Well, yes, that's a good way to put it. Fairly is actually a very accurate word.
yeah.
I'm definitely satisfied with the results because so far the last 4 years were horrible. economically speaking, politically speaking. Uh, I don't believe in government spending. I think
Yeah.
government spending is the root cause, especially government deficit. Government deficit is the root cause of all of our economic problems, and people don't get it. People don't understand that the reason why everything is expensive today is because government spends more than it generates in revenue.
Yeah.
And when you ask the government to spend more, it creates debt. And the national debt increases the cost of living because it creates what we call crowding out, the crowding out effect. The crowding out effect is when the government competes with the private sector for the same resources. So it pushes the private sector away. And especially
Mm.
that the government has the power to create laws. The private sector doesn't have that power. So it pushes the private sector away. So the private sector now has no choice but to increase prices to stay in competition. And that price and the increase of those prices fall on us, the consumers.
Hmm.
So, and that's the thing that people don't get about government spending and government deficit. That's why I say, like, when you understand how fiscal policy works, it makes no sense to be left wing, at least
Mm.
economically speaking. It makes no sense. You can be left wing when it comes to social issues, but even social issues are not detached from economic issues. That's the thing people don't understand. When you ask the government to do XYZ for us, especially when it comes to social issues, those demands you ask for the government has to get the money somewhere,
Yeah.
right? So it comes back. So, for example, uh, housing, education, and healthcare, those are social issues. But when you look at the cost of housing, for example, why the cost of housing has increased so much? Because of rent control, because of
Mm.
subsidized home ownership. These two things have a economic base.
Yeah.
Government broker will tell you housing is a human right. No, it's not. It's a service because at the end of the day, someone has to supply you that housing.
Yeah.
So you have to compensate him. You have to pay that person who's supplying you that service. So when they say that housing is a human right, education is a human right, healthcare is a human right, by saying this, they basically undermine uh, the role of market forces in these social industries. So when you undermine the role of market forces, when you try to focus on access, all you do is to increasing demand. But
Mm.
demand is what? It's unlimited wants. Supply is always limited. Always.
Yeah.
There's always people want a ton of things, but there is the number of goods and services available are limited. And then you create what? You create shortages. And when you create shortage, you increase the price of the service or the good or whatever.
Mm.
And that's why education is so expensive, housing is so expensive, and healthcare is expensive.
Yeah, I do kind of, I guess, believe education is a human right, but with a caveat that I don't believe like higher education in the sense of like going to school is a human right. I believe that, uh, like, I think libraries and things like that serve a very worthwhile purpose. And I believe that's education. I believe you can go to a library and get an education for yourself without demanding a service from other people. Although, that's government subsidized and all that kind of stuff too.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
see. I
definitely
see what you're
something.
saying. Maybe I should have been more precise. So higher education, because when I say education, I meant to
Yeah.
talk about college because that's
Yeah. Yeah.
student loans. That's the main issue when it comes to the education sector. And then you also have Common Core. Uh, we can talk about that because Trump wants to get rid of the Department of Education. But higher education is definitely not. It's definitely not a right. It's a service
Hmm.
because at the end of the day, the people. giving you that knowledge need to be paid. That's the thing. Like they're using the time, energy, and resources to convey a set of knowledge to you, right? So that thing they're conveying, it's a service that they're conveying to you. So so they need to be compensated for. That's what's your service. Now, when you say that, or you know, when you go to a public library and teach yourself, that I agree, absolutely. This is just you being
Yeah.
curious, using your mind, and furthering your knowledge. But when you go to a school setting to learn something, the people teaching you those things need to live. The
Mhm.
teachers, they need a salary.
Yeah.
So them conveying knowledge to you, it's a service that they're actually giving you by by taking the time, the effort and the resources to pretty much teach you something, even things that you may
Yeah.
not even use in the future, but still.
Yeah, there's some debate as to whether everything happening in colleges is education or not.
Right.
Um, but I guess I should clarify too. Maybe education, in my view, isn't a human right, but it's in the at least resources for information. It's in the best interest of the overall community to make certain things accessible.
Yes, yes,
I think,
absolutely.
yeah, like
Yeah.
it's not necessarily a human right, but
Yeah.
it does serve
Yeah, and that's what
society.
Thomas Jefferson talked about, in fact, in his
Yeah,
writings when it comes to public education. He says
yeah,
that the American citizen must be an educated person. He must
mm,
be informed, because if you're not
yeah,
informed, uh, you become slave of the government, and
yeah,
that's because when you look at, for example, at the time of the founding fathers, the voting system, people who could vote were educated. They were asset owners. Uh, Everyone else could not just vote. It was like a boys' club, if I could put it that. It was an exclusive right. It was a privilege. In fact, voting was a privilege, and I personally believe that voting should be a privilege and not a right. But we can discuss that later, because I know when I say that, it triggers a lot of people,
mm,
and they're like, "Oh, how can you say it?" Now I have my reason, but I will develop my reasoning if we come back to that specific topic. But I believe that voting should be a privilege and not a right. And in order to earn that privilege, you have to be educated. You need to understand what is at stake. A lot of people
yeah,
vote without understanding what is at stake, and they create a free riding culture, and that's why we
yeah,
have the welfare programs and all this stuff, because it's easy to just go and cast your vote, but you don't even know what you're voting for. You don't understand the implication, the consequences of the policies you're asking for. That's why I said, if people understood how government fiscal policy works, they will not be Democrats. They will not be Keynesian. You will simply not support any left-leaning policy economically. It doesn't make sense.
is the right really better at deficit spending, at being more responsible with the budget? Because like uh, Bush added trillions of dollars to the
Including
debt.
Trump too.
Trump did too. Trump had a significant amount, and partially that was COVID, but not all of it. So, is it that Republicans are better with spending, or is that just the rhetoric on the right?
It's more the rhetoric on the right, because, as you pointed out, Republicans didn't objectively do better.
Yeah,
Uh, Bush spent a lot of money on defense, wars, and stuff like that. Trump did it for pretty much everything else. He didn't go to
yeah,
war, thank God, but uh, government spending increased. So Republicans, unfortunately, although they are slightly better than Democrats, but they're not like significantly better. It's not like when Republicans take power, government spending suddenly shrinks. My problem with the political system, with both parties, especially with government, is that they refuse to shrink the size of government, especially Republicans. They refuse to shrink the size of government. Trump was saying that he was considering eliminating the federal income tax and replacing it with tariffs. Why do you have to replace it with tariffs?
Hmm.
If you no eliminate the federal income tax, do not impose tariffs, shrink the hell of government. We have thousands of agencies. We have almost 20 departments. Why do we need all of this?
Yeah.
Shrink it. Cut. That's how you actually reduce spending. Cut it. But because Trump said he's going to apply deregulation, that's good. He's going to do tax cuts, that's good. But he had no intention of reducing spending.
Yeah.
And one way to reduce spending is by actually cutting the size of government, by getting rid of programs. And people are like, well, but if you cut those programs, like, what about those workers? Go get a job at the private sector. What's a big deal
Yeah.
about it? What's a big
Yeah.
deal about it? It's people don't understand that the private sector is the true, like, it's skin in the game. When you're
Yeah.
in the private sector, especially when you're a business owner, and I tell people this, you have to be comfortable with uncertainty. You have to be, that's how you become an entrepreneur. You have to be comfortable with the fact that your monthly income will not be the same
Hmm.
every month. It's hard.
Yeah.
And people are not
It is.
comfortable with that. They're
Yeah.
not comfortable with that. That's why the private sector, that's why you gotta respect business owners. And the left tends to bash business owners all the time, like, oh, they're the one profiting at the expense of workers. They're the one. No, business owners are the one taking all the risk. Business owners, for usually for the first 3 years, they don't even have a salary. They don't pay themselves. While
Yeah.
the worker gets paid, regardless of how the business is doing, the worker gets his wage. The business owner doesn't.
Yeah.
And yeah, and that's something that they don't understand. When you want to increase, when you want to increase demand, right? Look how demand is increased in the private sector and in the public sector. Consumer demand. How consumer demand increase in the public sector? The bank prints money. You print
Yeah.
money, you inject in the economy, everyone feels richer. How the private sector increase consumer demand? Through marketing. And marketing demands that you spend money on ads, right? So you got to
Yeah.
spend money in order for people to see what you're doing, be interested in the value you're providing, purchase whatever product or service you're offering, and then make that money back. It's tough. And these are the things
Yeah.
that people don't see about the private sector.
I think, people on the left, I have some leftist friends, love them. But I disagree with some of their economic ideas. And there's some that I agree with. Like, I don't like, I don't like the cozy relationship with government and big business. Like Amazon, in my opinion, I understand why it happens, like why they get like a tax benefit for putting a plant in a different place. Like I understand why
Mhm.
cities want
Yeah,
that in their economy.
yeah,
I just don't think it's right to give a massive company like that free property or whatever, like any huge tax benefits. But at the same time, people on the left will, talk about minimum wage and stuff like that. I've had a friend tell me that if you can't afford to pay your employees well, you shouldn't own a business. And I'm like, that is a ridiculous statement. Every business operates at a loss for like the first year, 2 years, maybe even 3 years. So if you have to pay an exorbitant amount of money to employees, it just cuts your ability to operate and make any profit at all. Now, granted, once you're a big company like Amazon, like one of these Walmart or something, like I do think it's wrong to pay your employees crap just so that you can bring in more money. I do think that there should be some the employees of a large corporation should be benefiting, but I think it's different with small businesses. Like if somebody wants to work for you and they're like, I believe in what Germinal is doing. I don't care about the money. I'm a long term thinker. I want to be a part of this company, and Germinal is gonna. I'm gonna benefit in some way. Maybe Germinal is gonna give me stake in the company or something, right?
Mm,
Over time, like it makes sense for me to work for minimum wage right now for the future
mm,
possibility of more.
mm.
And that's why people work for startups, you
Yeah,
know? But if it's like, oh no, I want that future benefit, but I also want Germinal to pay me $25 an hour right now, it's like you can't have your cake and eat it too. Like it's one or the other.
right.
You want money now and no benefit? Like my friend he's in my head right now as I'm saying this. He was telling me where he actually tried to explain socialism to me, and he was getting frustrated because I'm like, okay, so who decides uh, when you start a business, who owns what percentage of the company? He's like, the the employees do, the whatever, right? I was like, okay, cool. What about when you're one person starting a company? Like you, and he's like, you need to get out of your head with businesses and companies. I'm like, I don't care what you call it, an endeavor, whatever you want to call it, an enterprise. What, who decides if that person gives away some portion of the company? It's like the employees do. I'm like, well, there's one employee, there's the owner. That's it. He owns 100% of the votes. So if it's up to him to decide if the next person in line gets a higher wage or a portion of the company or something like that, you're talking capitalism, not socialism, because that's how we operate in capitalism right now.
Yeah.
But I have never gotten a really good explanation for socialism by somebody who actually has a good idea. Like I know, I'm sure some people can make it sound really good, but in practice, because that's the way I would look at socialism is like I don't care. And maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of socialists tend to look at things and say they kind of re-envision Amazon, right? They
Mhm,
re-envision these big companies that already exist,
mhm.
but they don't have it thought out for a new company,
Mhm.
an individual, a solopreneur, like
Yeah,
somebody starting something new. They never think about that. It's always reimagining what already exists and
yeah,
redistributing what
yeah.
already exists. They don't have it worked out for how somebody can start, and that still turns into socialism somehow. So,
No, yeah, you're absolutely correct because socialism, at the end of the day, cannot work. Okay, let me put it this way: there is a metaphysical explanation to it. If you actually want to go deeper, I even wanted to write a book like called "Socialism and Metaphysical Explanation." Like literally go really deep. Like forget the economic aspect. Socialism does not work because it's contradictory to human nature. Simple as that. Human beings are self interested beings. Self interest does not mean selfish. There's a difference. The difference between selfishness and self interest is that when you're self interested, you pursue your goal, but you're not hurting anyone. You're just very
mhm.
focused on what you need to get done and you make sure you achieve your goal. Selfishness is the same thing, but at the expense of others. And that's where the problem with selfishness is that you hurt people on the way to achieve your goal. There's no
Yeah,
need to hurt people if you can achieve your goal without doing that. So human beings always do what's best for them, regardless. So when you have a living being like a human being who is naturally, fundamentally self-interested, you cannot expect outcomes like you cannot expect social outcomes to be produced the way socialism envisioned them. Adam Smith talked about how the common good is formed in a free society.
Hmm.
When people pursue their interest, and it's by pursuing the self-interest that they eventually form the common good. Like they eventually, whatever they're pursuing contributes to the wealth of the general public. And socialism is contrary to that. Like they try, like what socialism tries to do is to transform you, to make you a being that is no longer driven by its interest, but it's your self-interest that brings the best out of you.
Yeah.
It's your, you have, as a human being, you are an intrinsic value. You have your brain. Your brain is your most powerful muscle in your entire body. You can have talent, but if you don't know how to use your intelligence, that talent is actually useless.
Hmm.
So you have your brain, which is again your greatest asset, and you use that to bring your individuality, your creativity, and it's your creativity that actually produces value for others. When we take, for example, Amazon, right? So Amazon was created out of creativity. Jeff Bezos stumbled on the information that you can generate more than 2300% return, and he
Yeah.
tapped on that information. He capitalized on that information to produce value to society. Now, yes, and you're right that Amazon does pay its employees crap. That's true. But the point remains that he produces value for society, and the same goes for all the other big corporations, including small businesses too. Actually, small
Yeah.
businesses create a lot of value. A lot of value. I'm a small business owner. You are too. Like we all create value because of the set of skills that we have that are unique to us. And socialism, what socialism tries to do is to dispossess you of your creativity,
Yeah.
and try to redistribute, give it to others. But others are also individuals. Instead of trying to dispossess those who have created value, empower those who have not created yet. Make them believe that they can actually do it. That's how you reduce envy. You reduce envy by empowering people, by building their confidence, by making them believe that they can actually do it. And they can because they're human beings.
Hmm.
It's all start with the fact that you're a human being. You have a brain. Use your brain. Be creative. You gotta make strategic decisions. You gotta control your impulses. Like the lack of control of impulse is literally why a lot of people fail.
Yeah.
Simple as that. People don't control the impulse, and then things don't work out. I mean, there are other factors. Don't Do not get me wrong, but the lack of controlling your emotions is the fundamental reason why a lot of people fail, and then they become resentful of those who succeed.
I agree that it's against human nature to some degree, actually, because I think maybe somebody will get mad at this, but I think most parents are socialists within their household. Like most families operate in kind of a socialist kind of way
Let me expand on
internally.
that.
Yeah.
Do you know Nassim Taleb?
Nassim Taleb?
Nassim, his name is Nicola Nassim Taleb.
Mm-mm.
So he's a pretty famous author. He's a financier too. He wrote Black Swan, and he said at the national level, I'm a libertarian. At the state level, I'm a Republican. At the local level, I'm a Democrat, and at the family level, I'm a socialist.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah.
and I
Well, and
think, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
that's what I'm kind of getting at here
Yeah,
is socialism is not scalable. Like
no,
it makes sense. I think you can create a commune or
yeah,
communist or socialist
yeah,
commune of 20 people, 30
yeah,
people.
yeah,
But as it grows, it gets less and less
yeah.
workable because like if you're my neighbor, I want to give you something. Like if you need something, yeah, I want to help you out. But there's also a part of us, human nature, that thinks like, well, I'm helping him out right now, but I might need his help later.
Oh,
Like we're in
absolutely.
close proximity. So there's a mutual benefit there, even if I'm not seeing that benefit right now. But if you're in New York and I'm in Utah and we don't interact at all, there's no benefit to me. There's
Right.
no reciprocity there. There's no likelihood of like that favor being returned in any way to any degree.
Right.
So it's just there's no we are self-interested.
Yeah.
There's no self-interest there. If it's like, well, I'm just giving money away.
Yeah.
If I give this guy in New York money or this family in New York money, and granted we're
Yeah.
charitable people too,
Yeah.
typically. Like we want to help people.
Yeah.
But if it's just a matter of giving some of my earnings to somebody in New York who has no relationship with me, no relationship to anything in my world, then it's like I'm just giving money away. That's not how I operate. That's not
Yeah.
how people want to operate. So yeah, I just think it's not scalable for the
No,
very
yeah,
reason that
it's
you
definitely
said,
not
which you
scalable.
just
Like,
didn't
in
mention.
fact, socialism only works in the family, in the household
Yeah,
management, because kids do need guidance. They do need
yeah,
discipline. They do need guidance until they reach a point where we believe they're responsible enough to understand the magnitude and the consequences of their actions.
yeah,
That's when now you kind of like uh you pump the brake a little bit, you kind of ease up and you let them discover, you let them like make their own choices. But a kid between what age 3 and 14, 15, I would say you have to apply socialism. You have to apply
hmm
central planning,
yeah,
because especially when the kid gets like from age 12 or 13 until he goes to college, that's when kids usually tell you, I know what I'm doing, leave me alone. They have that
yeah,
rebellious nature. But that's when they're on the verge to make the biggest mistakes, right?
yeah,
And that's at the same time where it's a double-edged sword, is that's why if you try to apply too much control on them, all they're going to do is to defy you, to defy your authority. And for that's exactly at that period where, for example, with women, like with girls, you have a lot of teenage pregnancies, because the more you apply control on them, the more they actually going to challenge your authority. They're going to do things they're not supposed to do just to piss you off,
yeah,
right? And then like girls, they will become like young mothers, or they will get pregnant at an age when they're not supposed to. Boys will do things they're not supposed to, such as trying drugs and stuff like that. So at that stage in life, as a parent, you no longer apply socialism, but you apply what we call um dirigism. So it's a French word called dirigisme. So it's when you guide, right? But you guide by explaining the consequences of their actions. For example,
yeah,
if you have a daughter and she's 14 or 15, and now like she's becoming sexually active and stuff like that, you cannot stop that. But what you can do is say, hey, like, listen, you're growing, you become an attractive woman, like guys are coming to, they're chasing you. Be careful, because if you're not smart about your actions, you can get an STD, you can get unwanted pregnancies. Showing her even like evidence of what you're saying. So when she sees it, she's like, oh, she becomes more careful about it. But if you say, no, I don't want you to see boys, I don't want you to, that's when she's going to go do it, just to
yeah,
defy your authority. So it's more about like guiding the kid. So like, so now you became less authoritarian, less socialist, more like you apply the visible hand,
yeah,
right? The visible hand, like you guide them, but you let them make their own decisions.
yeah. I just thought of a good business idea for somebody who has suffered not suffered, but has had a unexpected pregnancy at a young age. You can uh, market to families with daughters that are 12 to 15 years old and be like, they can come spend a day with me to see what it's like to be a single mother
Yeah,
at the age of 16 or
right.
something like that.
And
Although
yeah.
if it becomes too profitable, then it kind of defeats the purpose.
But yeah, like, I think like that is to me like the best way to actually make kids understand. It's to show
Yeah,
them the consequences of things. If you have a boy and he's tempted to do drugs and stuff, you take him in the hood, say, look at what those guys are doing. He sees it for
yeah,
himself. When he sees it,
yeah,
he's shocked. He will say, I don't want to do this. But if you just tell him don't do it without backing your explanation, without backing your statement, he would be just tempted to do it because it's human nature, it's the human mind. We are
yeah,
attracted uh to mystery, where we are attracted to interdictions. The more you
yeah,
say no, the more that's what we want to do. But when you
yeah. Well, I
show,
mean,
yeah,
yeah, I mean, it's like when you're 15, 16 years old, maybe you think somebody doing hard drugs is, cool, right? But then, I mean, there's multiple instances of this happening, different people's lives, but it's like you see behind the veil, maybe you see the guy's home life and you're like, oh, so he just leaves his kid at home all
yeah,
day while he's out like doing drugs, and like this kid is just not taken care of. It's like when you get to see a part of somebody that, when you see a curated part of their personality, when they're their public persona, they're out in public and they look like a cool person. But then you see behind the scenes and it's like, oh, their home life is a wreck. They have nothing going for them. But like as a kid, you're more easily swayed by that public persona
yeah,
that somebody has, rather than like what you don't you don't have that depth to like really think about what's going on behind the scenes,
yeah,
So I mean, you get shown that, and then you're like your view of somebody will
yeah,
change immediately. It's like, oh, this is not the person I thought he was.
yeah, absolutely.
So, Department of Education. So you mentioned Trump has floated the idea of closing the Department of Education. There's potentially going to be a lot of things closing, depending on how efficiently Doge operates.
Yeah.
Um, do you think Department of Education closing would be a good thing?
Uh, well, I think so because what Trump wants to do is to bring education back to the states,
Yeah.
to let the states decide, because that's the bottom line of federalism, is to let states who are autonomous and independent decide how they want to govern the resident or the citizen. Um, the reason why Democrats are against it is because they believe that some states will deliberately omit some parts of American history, or they will minimize the impact. And that's where the whole issue is. Because at the federal level, teaching slavery became mandatory and people should know about slavery. But the problem now with teaching slavery is that they turn that into critical race theory. They
Hmm.
start to blame. It's no longer an historical fact. Oh yeah, that has happened. It has happened. That's happened. Now they try to blame and say, oh, like all the white folks who are here have benefited from what has happened, and that's why you, as a black person or as a minority, are in this situation because of the white man, because of the white woman. You see, they're better off than you, and you, they benefited from slavery indirectly. They had like a parent or grandparent or great 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 grandparent who had slaves, like, and that's
Yeah.
where the fundamental issue is um, with education in America. So I understand why Democrats and liberals or progressive in general are skeptical about getting rid of the Department of Education, because they believe that states like Alabama, Mississippi, they will literally throw, the history, some of the horrors of American history in the
Yeah.
dustbin. When Andrew Jackson, for example, got rid of the Indians. But history is so complex and complicated. And the issue is that the Democrat, they try to also turn history into a black and white thing. Oh, blacks are the good guys, Indians are the good guys, whites are the evil people who literally get rid of everyone on their way. That's
Hmm.
not true. For example, no one talks about the fact that there were a lot of black slave owners. No one talks about the fact that Native Americans were also slave owners. No one talks about this. They,
Yeah.
they, no one talks about the fact that, for example, with slavery, the whole mistreatment, whipping and all this stuff was not actually the dominant thing in slavery. That's what
Yeah.
Alex Haley successfully did because he was the first to produce a movie about slavery. And when you watch Roots, right, Kunta Kinte, all this, like that's the picture of slavery they put in your head, like whites whipping blacks all day long. But at the end of the day, let's get something straight, and let's use logic here. Slaves were assets to the slave owner. How do you intend to increase production if you keep whipping your asset?
Yeah.
Does it make sense? On the
Yeah, and there
contrary,
were there were brutal slave
oh
owners,
yeah,
of
no, do
course,
not get me
but like,
wrong,
yeah,
absolutely.
but they want to make it seem like everything, and I'm not at
Yeah,
all
exactly.
justifying
And that's
slavery,
my point.
right?
Of course, there were brutal
Yeah,
slave owners. Absolutely. There were some who were actually brutal. But was it the majority? That's the
yeah,
question. And that's where Alex Haley and Progressive, they tried to make it seem like they tried to make it seem like, oh, that's how slavery was the whole time. Yes,
yeah,
there were some brutal slave owners, but for the other slave owners who were not brutal, who actually want to increase production of the crops, of the cotton, it's better to feed your slaves so that they're strong and they can work longer hours than whipping them all day. Because the
yeah,
more you whip them, the less energy they have to produce.
yeah. I would imagine some of the worst treatment was like in transit, like when you're being transported to different potential owners and stuff like that. I would imagine owners tended to be a little bit more, I guess, humane would be the right word, but humane's like the worst word I could use probably in that. But you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, I think the people transporting, they had less vested interest in the slaves, so they probably treated them a lot worse, and
yeah.
probably there's possibly even some uh, long term reasons to do that. You know, like you to have a slave owner be comparatively better in a sense, a
Mhm.
better place to be for the slaves. But
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, slavery is like a dark thing in America's history,
absolutely.
but it's it is something that I've heard people say, "Oh, we should stop talking about it." I don't think we should ever
No,
stop
we should
talking about
definitely teach
it.
people about slavery. Absolutely. People
Yeah,
should know about it because it's part of American history. And
yeah,
that's where it's a thin line between learning about it and moving on from it. You learn from the
yeah,
past to make better decisions in the future or building resentment out of it. And that's where the
yeah,
problem with the left is that they teach you slavery to build resentment out of it. And then they inculcate in you this victim mindset mentality. Or,
yeah.
the legacy of slavery, because of slavery, we can do XYZ. Like it gets to a point where, like, for how long are you going to still using slavery as the excuse to justify your shortcomings? Because, for example,
Yeah.
I I'm originally from Ivory Coast. I came here in 2010. Africa has undergone colonization. Colonization is not different from slavery. It's the same treatment they give to slaves. Like they whip you, they treat you poorly. It's the same. You have no freedom.
Mm,
You have no. There's no difference. Africa has been colonized. Blacks were slaves here. But when I came here, I didn't come with a victimhood mentality. I'm like, I'm coming here to make a life for myself. Like
yeah,
I don't have time to dwell on the fact that, like, I was my parents, or not my parents, but my great grandparents were colonized and all this stuff. That was their lives. In fact, I think God or nature or whatever supreme being, that I was not born at that period in time, because that would have been my reality. I was born in
Yeah.
1990. At this time, the internet was starting to come to life. The world was pretty much electrified. We had like life would people's living standard was much better. The Soviet Union was crashing. Life was better in 1990. We had things that people 100 years ago did not have. I
Yeah.
always thank God for that, for the fact that I was born at that period in history and not born in the 19th century or not born in the 17th or 18th century, because life would have been worse for me. So,
Yeah.
and that's the thing. Like, I'm not going to dwell on those past actions. They have happened for a reason. You learn from it, because it's important to learn your history, to know where you're from. But you are not those to who those things have happened to. That's the thing to understand, and that's where, like, as I said, it's a really thin line between, learning your history to make informed decisions in the future, or learning your history to build resentment out of you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting to watch how different people like bring up their kids and lay out the foundation of like race relations in America. Because some people, it's like obviously slavery happened, and it's something that obviously we'd never want something like that to
Of
happen
course, of
again for any race of people. But there's this, you can, for instance, I do think there's different treatment for black people by police on average. It doesn't mean cops are looking to kill black people in mass or anything like that, but it does mean there are, there's profiling and stuff like that. But there's different ways that you can like coach a kid on that. Like the one way is to, I've heard people say that white people don't need to have the talk, but I came from a fairly privileged background. My parents had a little bit of money, and they provided well for us. And my dad definitely gave me that conversation. He's like, if you ever get pulled over, it wasn't a conversation of like, oh, your race is like, it wasn't a race conversation. It was just like, this is what you do if you get pulled over by the police. You put your light on in the car, put your hands on the steering wheel, open your window, and address the officer with respect and all kinds of stuff like that. And the whole thing is to de-escalate. But then like some people will be coached of like basically kind of creating paranoid in kids of like black people are out to get you. Uh, I've heard somebody recently told me that some black people or minorities will tell their kids to like go to a gas station if you're about to get pulled over, which I guess can cause some issues too because it's like you're not stopping. But yeah, like I think some people can create kind of like a paranoia in their children and other people, like of what an interaction is going to be like with police, and it can kind of create a self fulfilling prophecy because it's like, well, if a cop comes to you and you act like the cop is the enemy, then it's like there's a hostile interaction right from the start. So it's not surprising why some bad things happen. Like interactions with different races and police happen all the time without any incident, but we
Yeah,
focus on the ones that are like, incidents, and some people act like that's the norm when it really isn't.
exactly.
So,
And to even expand on what you said, it's true that blacks do have a different treatment
yeah,
than whites, but it also doesn't mean that whites are spared, right? At the end of the day, it comes down everything comes down to how you address the police officer. If you follow
yeah,
the commands, blacks usually tend to have more of a belligerent approach when they interact with police officers, because they don't trust the police, because they assume that he's coming with the intent to kill you or to brutalize you by any means. He's looking for a loophole for you to make a mistake, and then he will pull his gun and take you down. Um, but that also stems from the racialization of poverty, because in America, there is a social correlation between race and social status. We usually tend to say that whites, they're the educated, they're the nobles, they're the wealthiest, and blacks are the criminal and the poor. So when you're black, we assume that you automatically had a rough background. It's not the case. Personally, I had a privileged background. My parents are very educated. They made the money through the intellect, like the typical middle class or upper middle class. I went to
Yeah.
private school my whole life. So I've been fortunate to travel, to be to countries that many people never took the plane in the first place. So I am very privileged. I've even the fact that I came to the United States. I went to Catholic University of America, which is a private school. Tuition was at least 50K a year. I went there for 4 years, private school. Then I went to
Hmm.
George Washington University for my master's, another private school. I am privileged. And I don't feel bad about it. I'm not going to say I'm sorry for being privileged. For what? No, I'm not going to feel bad about it. On the contrary, I'm happy because I have the resources. My parents gave me the resources that I need to give me that competitive advantage in life. It's not like I'm
Yeah.
privileged and then I'm sitting home playing video games all day. No, I started a company. I am working. It's hard. My first year, I didn't pay myself at all. People don't
Yeah.
understand that. So yeah, it's not like I'm just being privileged and sitting home. No, I'm actually working. But the point I'm trying to say is that when it comes to police interactions and races, I understand why black people have a belligerent approach toward cops because of the history behind it. And that's understandable. But it comes down to individuals, how each person interacts with police officers. Even if the police officer, because there's some mess up police officers too who just want to mess with black people. There's some of them.
Yeah.
I'm not saying
Yeah.
they're it's all of them. Of course not. Some of them are. So when you encounter that kind of police officer, you have to be the most obedient person on the planet. Don't try to argue because, as I always say, when you get pulled over, the officer at that instant become the most powerful man in the world. He has the gun to take you out.
Hmm.
If he shoots you and you're dead, he's going to be placed on administrative leave, maybe go to jail, and that's it. But you're out. You're done. It's finito. You're out.
Yeah.
You're not coming back. You lost. Your parents will cry. Your friends will cry and blah blah blah. But that's it. The police officer, he's still alive. So it's your best interest to be as obedient and polite and respectful as possible during those 5 to 10 minutes of interaction because they can be the most decisive. And when you look at most of those interactions that end up in deadly situations, it's because at some point the person being pulled over did something he was not supposed to do. At some point, when you look at, for example, the case of Philando Castile, who was absolutely respectful. Unfortunately, he made the mistake to tell the officer that he had a gun. If he said quiet and didn't say anything, the officer would have said step out of the car. And then they would have searched for the car. And then even if they found the gun, the officer is not going to suddenly shoot Philando Castile. You already
Yeah.
handcuff him, you put him by the car, and you're searching the car. But Philando Castile said, "Oh, sir, I have a gun." And then he reached for the glove department, and the guy freaked out and blast the guy. Unfortunately, and then you also have other situations where the officer is giving you commands, and you try to resist those commands. When you resist those commands, all you do is escalating the issue. Now you're actually propping him to use his weapon to shoot you.
Yeah.
So it's true that uh, treatment among races and the police are different, but it always comes down to individuals, how you
Yeah.
interact with police officers. So
Yeah, and there is a huge power imbalance in those interactions too. Like the cop has all of the power, you have basically none. Uh, there's no you can't shoot at a police officer without ending up in jail or dead. But a police officer can shoot at you if they have some, even if it's a flimsy reasoning, they can fire their weapon at you. And, you know, you can end up with a cop who is a douchebag and they understand the power imbalance and they can be saying things to try to get under your skin. And that's something it's not easy, especially like I'm almost 40. At this point in my life, I can bite my tongue pretty well if I need to. But when I'm in my 20s, not really like and I mean, people in general have egos. We have aggression, stuff like that. So like if somebody is, you know, nudging you, trying to get under your skin, they can.
yeah,
And unfortunately, the power dynamic of that situation is one in which it's best for you to bite your tongue and fight your battle later when there are no guns involved. Because when there's guns involved, the only one that can legally use it in those situations is the cop.
yeah,
But
because yeah, you
yeah,
can say, "Oh, I know my rights," blah blah blah. The guy's the gun, and
yeah,
he will find a way to actually use it if you keep
yeah,
being belligerent. So
yeah,
even if you know your rights, you're trying to defend yourself. It's just better to comply. Worst come to worst, let him take you to the police station. At least you're safe. Once you're
yeah.
there, now you can battle all the rights you want. But when you interact with him for those 5, 10 minutes, your life can be taken away at any moment within those five,
Hmm.
ten minutes. It's scary.
Yeah, yeah. And that's everybody. I mean, that's not even just race, but
Yeah.
race does come into play there, where it is a tougher situation for Black people and some minority people who are facing somebody who might be racist, might have a chip on his shoulder, whatever the case might be. You know, so it is there's something else with this. Like I feel like black and white thinking happens on the right and the left here. So like the left tends to believe that cops are just kind of in the wrong, especially if race is involved. And the right tends to just the rhetoric on the right tends to be just comply and you won't have this problem. But it's like that's not
Yeah,
always true either, you know?
it's gray. It's not black and white. It's definitely
Yeah.
gray. It's complex.
Yeah. I'd love to go back a little bit to the voting thing
Sure.
that you mentioned because I'm sure we have some overlap here because I made a post before the election and my position is voting is not a duty because people call it a civic duty.
Mhm.
I'm like, voting is not a civic duty; it's a civic responsibility.
Good
And like,
point. Excellent point.
if if you and I were informed and we cast our votes, and then two other people who know nothing about politics haven't paid attention, maybe they've seen a sign and they like the way the sign looks, or they like somebody's name and they cast a vote, and those votes of ignorance can basically undermine our votes, even though we put a lot of time and effort into understanding what we're voting for. And I'm not just talking about us, anyone who's informed, trying to understand the situation, no matter how they vote. I'm not saying one vote is right and one vote is wrong, but somebody who is not paying attention, just voting because they feel like they have to, that those low information voters can cancel out somebody who put in a significant amount of work for their vote. So I think it's actually more responsible for somebody who is not informed. I think they have a right to vote. I don't think we should gatekeep voting. Like I think people have a right to be able to vote. I just think it's irresponsible to vote if you are not taking up that responsibility earlier in the process where you actually start learning about what you're voting for?
You are making a good point. I will have to push back on the right part. I think it's a privilege. I think it's again, like I'm going to make my point again. It's a privilege because it's something you have to earn. Uh, I think we should have a mechanism that will earn you that will earn you the right to vote. And that means, for example, either we determine your social status, right? If you're an asset owner, then you certainly have that right to vote because you understand what is at stake. If you're not an asset owner, then we have to implement like aptitude tests to test your knowledge about things because it's too and once we test your knowledge and people don't like it because especially on the left they never like the fact that we bring the idea of the aptitude test because they say, oh, you're trying to show that blacks are not smart and blah blah blah. You use the aptitude test as a way to cast them out. It's not about casting them out. It's about making sure that everyone, not just blacks, but everyone understands what is at stake. If you vote for
Mm.
this policy, what will be the implication of it? What will be the consequences of it over the short term, over the long term? Do you even understand what or what words are being used to define X and Y policies? Those things are important, and a lot of people in America don't even have the slightest idea what they're voting for,
Hmm.
and it's a problem because we are the one now who have to pay for it, and I don't think it's fair. So for asset owners, you determine based on the social status, the asset, how much they make, and blah blah blah. And then for those who don't have assets, you determine based on the aptitude test how much they know, and that shows how informed they are as voters. It's something that should be earned. It shouldn't just be given just because. The reason why politicians talk about vote, vote, vote is because government is not incentivized by the profit motive. Government is incentivized by the expansion of power. The more government, the more people vote, especially in democratic societies, the more power, the more the power of the government expands. The government is driven by the electorate, the expansion of the electorate. That's why they want people to vote because when more people vote, is the electoral base that is increasing, and therefore government has more power. But if the government was driven by the profit motive, voting wouldn't matter at all.
Mm.
It wouldn't be an issue. But because government spends more than it generates in revenue, and they want to make government bureaucrats want to make people believe that their choice matters. So they say come and vote, and because they know that most people believe in the illusion of government. Oh, we need government to do those things for us, and that's why
Yeah.
we vote for those, and that's why we vote. That's why Obama said, "Don't boo, vote, go out and vote, go out and vote, go out and vote." But all they want you to do is to vote for more government spending. That's what they want you to do, and because people don't understand the economic implications of government spending, they think they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, I would say a lot of people don't understand what's happening when the government spends money. I
Yep.
mean, they just they see, oh, I benefited in some way or I got hurt in some way. That I mean, most people kind of think of politics as like how it directly influences their life in the immediate. Most people, I don't think, are looking at what are the implications of this. Not today, not tomorrow, but 10 years from now. I don't think a lot of people are taking that into consideration. I don't I don't love the idea of having to have assets or something to vote because I do worry about if you if the only people that can vote are the people with assets, then there could be a tendency to vote for a system that makes the assets in their hands more secure while making it less likely for people who don't have the assets to be able to secure those same assets. I do think that's a possibility. But the
That's true.
aptitude test is sorry, what was that?
No, I say you're right. It's true that it can create it can create a hindrance for upper mobility, for social mobility. It's
Yeah.
true that that's definitely a factor to consider, because those who have assets, if they have the right to vote, they will certainly vote for laws to prevent those at the bottom, right, to move up forward, to move
Yeah.
up in the social ladder. That's true.
I do think an aptitude test, and I wouldn't want something that's like grueling or anything like that. I do something some kind of like some level of competency would be nice for voters to have.
Yeah,
And it wouldn't even have to be much. Like if you don't even know the three branches of the government, I don't think you should be voting
yeah,
because
right.
you need to go back and learn a little bit,
Right,
you know?
and that's what I'm saying. It's the aptitude test should be big for anyone else, right? Because again, like when it comes to the asset owners, this is that was pretty much the system that has always been in place, even
Yeah.
again at the time of the founding fathers. That's how it was. It's those guys, they're landowners, they have all sort of assets. Usually people like that they have always been educated,
Yeah.
because in order for you to retain the value of your asset, you need to have a certain level of education, especially financial education, because it's not just about giving you assets, and that's the reason why the redistribution of wealth doesn't work. But I can expand on that in a bit. Right? It's
Yeah.
not just about giving you assets. I can give you all the assets you want, but if you don't have the knowledge necessary to maintain the value of those assets will tank. Their value will tank, and they will be worthless. So those guys by default are already educated. That's why for them, such a system, like that's why they have that privilege, that right to vote. Now, for those who do not own assets, the aptitude test is the only egalitarian metric, or the egalitarian indicator to determine the level of competency when it comes to government, when it comes to policies, so that you kind of know. And the question, because it's the same as people who apply for US citizenship, they had to take a test.
Yeah.
They got to about the constitution, the branch of government, all this stuff. They got to know about those things. So it's the same. The US citizen is not about like a test where you have to run regressions, like it's not mathematical or anything, but it's understanding. It's just about logic, understanding the implications of what you're asking for. Everything we do, the implications. Nothing is
Yeah.
free. If you ask the government to create a program, know that it's going to come out of your paycheck. And the
Yeah.
government does not ask you for the tax rate, they impose that on you. I've always argued that your gross pay and your net pay should always be equal. I don't believe in the income tax,
Mm.
right? Like it's and the French, for example, I always give crap to the French, because when you look at French presidential elections, the major issue, especially the major economic issues that they always bring up, is the purchasing power. They're saying, well, uh, we have really low purchasing power, and blah blah blah. But French people love the state. They love centralization. They're obsessed with social programs.
Mhm.
Well, if you're obsessed with social programs, then why are you complaining that you have a low purchasing power? Where do you think those social programs come from? They got to come from
Yeah.
somewhere. You're asking the French government to provide free healthcare, to provide free this, free that for you, no problem. But it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost of your paycheck. That's why France
Yeah.
is the worst country to live in when it comes to paying taxes, because they would take nearly 80% of everything you earn. And that's a
Yeah.
problem. So, and that's what people need to understand. For example, the government never create a referendum to ask people how much should we tax you guys. They never did. They just it's a decision they make on their own. And
Yeah.
then you work, your check comes every 2 weeks. They don't ask you. You see, X went to Medicare, X went to Social Security, X went to this, X went to that.
Yeah. You mentioned something about the competency test, aptitude test, about how Democrats might react to it, saying that it's racist or something like that, right? I always, it's interesting. I don't consider Democrats, like the people, racist, but I do believe that there's some rhetoric that gets pushed down that ultimately has some racism built into it, and that would kind of be one of them, because it's like if you're proposing an aptitude test and just the proposal of it says, well, you're trying to get black people out of voting. It's like, that is kind of a racist comment to me, because it's like, well, you're assuming that black people aren't capable of it. And if I'm proposing an aptitude test, I expect basically every race of people to have some people that don't pass and some people that do. I don't believe that it's going to come down to racial lines or anything. And it kind of reminds me of the voting stuff, like the voter ID. You know, people will be like, "Oh, it's racist to ask for voter ID." But, you know, I think there's a Fox thing that they did where they went around and they're like asking white liberals if it's racist to ask for voter ID. And then afterward, they cut to them going around. I think it's in the Bronx, and they start asking a bunch of black people, like, "Do you know where to get your driver's license at? Like, do you know where to get an ID? Do you have an ID?" And it's like every one of them is like, "Yeah, I know where the driver's license bureau is. I have an ID." Like all this stuff, and it's like, where did these ideas come from? I know some people don't have access to IDs and stuff like that, but I don't think it's as prevalent as the left would want people to believe, or the Democrats would want people to believe. I just don't think it's an issue. And those arguments start to sound pretty racist when
Yeah.
you step back.
Yeah, it's the same with affirmative action. They
Yeah.
say, oh yeah, like we need to lower standards for blacks so that they can get into schools, but that means that you assume that blacks are not intelligent. You
Yeah.
assume that blacks are not competent, so that you have to lower these things. It's insulting.
Yeah.
It's really insulting, and those white liberals, they're very condescending. I don't know if they're aware of it. I believe some do, and that's why when they see blacks who vote Republicans, they get mad because they
Yeah.
assume that we are the ones who are supposed to help you because you cannot help yourself. You're too dumb to know what to do. That's what they
Yeah.
tell you indirectly. They don't put it in your face. Like, most white liberals are NIMBYs. I'm sure you've heard that term, not in my backyard.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they're NIMBYs. Like, they will tell you how much they care about minorities, how much they want the good for minorities, and blah blah blah. But those guys never go in the hood. When they see, it's true, they never do. They don't know how those people live in low income neighborhood. They don't know how those people live. And when they see low income people in their neighborhoods, they're the same guys who call the cops. Or
Yeah.
say, oh yeah, there's a suspicious guy, and then they wear Black Lives Matter. Why are they calling the cops on you? That's what it is. Like,
Yeah.
that's why I don't take them seriously. They're they're the same that will go in the street to protest with you, and then they're the same that will call the cops on you if you're in their neighborhoods.
Yeah. Well, I used to be liberal. I
Thank God you're
still,
not.
huh?
Thank God you're not anymore. I mean, you see some values of it, which is understandable, but at
I'm
least.
I'm center left.
Mhm,
Like when I take the political compass test, I'm very libertarian and just barely off center to the left.
mhm.
So it's like I have some things that I identify with the left on. I think the left has gone more left over
Yeah,
the last 20 years. And at a certain point, I just couldn't go along with it.
yeah,
But I remember I was a little bit more wrapped up in the progressivism This would be around 2015, 2016. I liked Bernie Sanders. And I came home to my girlfriend one day. I wasn't, I read an article and it was how dreadlocks are racist. And I told my girlfriend, I was, oh, do you know dreadlocks are racist? And I explained it to her. And I wasn't like explaining it to her in the sense of like, oh, this is an absurd article. I was explaining it to her like, oh, this is the logic behind considering it cultural appropriation and stuff like that. And I remember my interactions with different races of people. It's like, it's kind of in your mind. I'm talking to a black person right now. I'm talking to a Native American. Like it's just, it's the ideology on the left is to
Identity
view
politics.
people as the races. Like that's how you look at people. And now it's like, well, also like you kind of curate what you're saying a little bit more depending on who you're talking to. Some ideas you don't want to say around maybe black people because you have an impression of your head of what a black person believes. So it's like
And
there
it's
is a
wrong to
lot of
it's
like,
actually wrong to assume what black people should believe,
yeah,
because at the end of the
yeah,
day, and that's where the left missed the whole point. Before being black, white, male, female, straight, gay, whatever you want, we are individuals.
yeah, yeah,
That's the fundamental basis of being human, is that we
yeah,
are individuals. And the left, especially the progressive left, that focuses on identity politics, and that's why Kamala lost. Identity
yeah,
politics doesn't work because you put people into boxes. The
yeah,
left always prioritize the group over the individual. But a group is nothing else but an aggregate of individuals.
yeah,
When a group makes a decision, it's not a decision of a collective, it's the decision of a charismatic man who imposes will on everyone else.
yeah,
And those who try to challenge his authority are severely reprimanded by the rest of the group, who are too coward to stand up for themselves. That's what
yeah,
groups are. So that's why I genuinely hate groups. I cannot stand groups because it's
yeah,
it's it's never decisions are never unanimous. They pretend to be unanimous, but they're not.
yeah,
They're not. And that's what the left is trying to make you believe, that, oh, we believe in the community, we believe in the group, like we believe in the collective. No, a collective doesn't have rights. Only
yeah,
individuals do. Rights are always for individuals, they're not for groups.
yeah.
And that's where the left went astray. Like, when you look at the left at the time of Bill Clinton, that was a true center left Democrat.
Yeah.
You won't even he doesn't even sound like left per se. Sure, Milton Friedman used to say that Bill Clinton was a socialist, but that's because Milton Friedman was very libertarian. But Bill Clinton, for example, compared to Bernie Sanders or even any, like, Elizabeth Warren, Bill Clinton is pretty much right wing,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
Bernie Sanders is very left, very left, and uh, but Bernie Sanders doesn't really care about identity politics. Bernie Sanders was more about, like, real, like, true socialism. It's about the economics of socialism. Like, oh, we want rights for workers. We want to increase the minimum wage. Although I completely disagree with his policy, I think his policies are nonsense. But at least Bernie Sanders did not get into the whole mess of identity politics. He didn't have time for that. I,
I disagree.
Go
Okay,
ahead.
I read his book,
Okay.
the one that came out after 2016 or
Hmm.
around 2016.
Hmm.
I remember reading it,
Hmm.
and so to go back just a little bit,
Hmm.
after Trump won in 2016, I didn't vote for him or anything like that, and identity politics is kind of what kind of like got thrown in my face, and I was like, what am I standing in right now? Because I remember I felt aligned with some people who are progressives
Hmm.
even though I didn't like their decision of like
Mhm.
backing Hillary Clinton after she stabbed Bernie in the back.
Mhm.
Um, so I remember I wasn't running a podcast or anything on just Facebook. I remember trying to give a positive message about Trump winning. I'm like, hey, I know not all of us supported Trump. Not a lot of us are not happy with him winning, but his success is our success. So I think we should all hope for his success as a president.
Mhm.
And this one girl I knew, she responded and just, you don't know what it's like for black people and gay people
Mhm.
and other minorities and Asians and all this stuff. And I was like, what the hell just happened? Like, this is somebody I felt aligned with like several months earlier. And I actually took a break from social media after that because
Yeah, it's very intoxicating.
yeah. And so, like, that's kind of what drove me. So, identity politics is what drove me away from the left largely. But then I remember reading Bernie's book,
Mhm.
and he kept saying something.
I did not read
Uh,
this book. I've got to admit. The reason why, before you continue, the reason why I assumed that Bernie was not into the identity politic games was because during his speeches, he did not emphasize enough about it. Maybe that's
yeah,
why because you read, so you have more information than me
yeah,
on that matter, and you're going to make your point in a bit. But I just wanted to clarify that I did not read this book like The Revolution, so I did
yeah.
not know how actually involved he was in identity politics. So yeah,
Well, I feel like he wasn't. Uh, it didn't come into his speeches very much or
yeah.
anything like that. And maybe he didn't write his book. I mean, it's very possible that he wasn't the one that wrote his book. So, but in his book, he kept there was this. He would say we need to. It's been a while since I've read it. So he would say things like we need to help the poor and black people and brown people. And it's like,
Mm,
and I'm sitting here like partially agreeing with the economic ideas of socialism at the time,
mhm,
or social democracy,
mhm.
democratic socialism, whatever it's called. And I'm reading this and I'm like, okay, if this is about class,
Mhm.
then why are you talking about black people and brown people after already saying we need to help the poor and middle class? Because if you're saying that, why say black people and brown people there? Because it's like, are you're either implying that all black people and brown people
Or
are
poor.
poor and
Yeah.
need help, or you're saying that even if they're not poor,
Mhm.
they need help because of their race, which sounds, it
Basically,
just didn't make sense to me.
it is basically saying yeah the poor because that's what
Yeah,
it comes down to. Say oh yeah because they're black therefore they're poor. It comes back to my point of that social correlation, right? We assume that you're white, therefore you're rich, you're educated and stuff like that. And if you're a minority, especially if you're black, we assume that you had a rough background, you're poor, and you're pretty
yeah,
much a criminal. Yeah.
yeah. It kind of reminds me. There's that. I'm not going to get the quote right, but the Biden, I believe, said something like, "I believe uh, poor people or something are just as smart and capable as white people."
Yeah.
And it was like that's kind of like what I felt reading Bernie's book,
Yeah.
because I'm like, you're you're mixing these two
Yeah.
different things, and kind like it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And as I said, it's because in America we attach race to social class.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to. Because
Well, that's how it started, right? That's how black and white originally started. It was a social class thing, wasn't
yeah,
it?
it was always a social class because when you look at the time of our founding fathers, right, the wealthiest people were white, like they were landowners. But again, the part they don't say is that there were also blacks who were very wealthy, but they were
Yeah.
such in minority that the people completely dismiss that fact. There is a book that I would recommend that you read. It's called Black Slave Owners. It talks about basically black slave owners in South Carolina from 1790 until 1860, pretty much like 5 years before the abolition of slavery. And it tells you how white, the white plantation elite class actually respected the black aristocrats, like the black who were slave owners. They even used to see them as the peers. So
Hmm.
it tells you that so long as you have money, so long as you have wealth, your skin color doesn't even matter at this point. You
Yeah.
become part of them. So if you're black and you're wealthy, you become white. That's what it is. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Like they consider you white. And in Brazil, that's how race has always been.
Hmm.
You're rich. If you're rich, you're white. If you're black, you're poor. So
Yeah.
even a guy like Pelé, I'm sure you heard of Pelé. He's very successful soccer player. He's
Yeah.
called King Pelé and stuff. Brazilian. This guy was black, but he was among the richest Brazilians ever. So everyone call him white because of his wealth. And that's always been the
Yeah.
same in America. Is you know you're if you're wealthy, if you enter that class, you're considered white. If you're broke, you're considered black. And now the twist is that poor whites refuse to be considered black as well,
Hmm.
right? So that's
Yeah.
it's very interesting. Like poor whites, especially in antebellum America, they're like, yes, we're broke, but we're not like those Negroes. No, we are different. They're like, we're
Hmm.
still white, and that's where like and that's where it gets interesting because race and social class in America are deeply intertwined.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's what caused us to falsely assume things because of that social correlation that we artificially create to distinguish people based on external factors such as race.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it reminds me of like the whole white privilege thing that gets pushed on the left. It's like if you are successful and you're white, it's because of white privilege. And if you're not successful and you're not white, it is because of white privilege. But if you're successful and you're a minority, it's despite white privilege. And if you're not successful and you're white, you failed even though having the benefit of white privilege. And it just doesn't make sense. Like it's like and that's why I just reject the concept of white privilege in general. Do I think being white benefits people in certain cases? Yeah, 100%. Like I think there are instances where somebody might get favoritism because they're white. Somebody might have the opposite because they're white too, but I would say probably more often because like favoritism, at least historically. But then I just don't going back to what you said earlier. Like I'm the same way. Like we're all individuals. To look at somebody and assume that they have something or lack something because of the color of their skin is just antithetical to what freedom and individuality really is. Like it I'm not saying race doesn't play into things because it definitely does. Like there are racists in the US in
Yeah,
the
of
world
course.
and race does play into some things, but to be able to look at people and just say I don't know this person, but I know the color of their skin, so I know that this is basically what they're looking at. It's like that is where racism that is racism. Like racism is creating a hierarchy based on race. And that's what like the concept of white privilege, a lot of identity politics, that's what it is all about. It's about creating a hierarchy of like, okay, you are you're black and you're gay, so you're here in the hierarchy, you're white, straight, male, okay, you're down here, whatever, however you want to look at this hierarchy that people create. And it's like, this is this is racism. That
Oh, yeah.
is what racism is.
Oh, yeah. No, absolutely. It's like I personally. Here's the thing with white privilege, in my opinion. I made a post about it. I think last year. Did white privilege play a role in American history? Yes, at some point. We had
Yeah.
slavery, we had segregation. Does is white privilege relevant today to the point that you cannot achieve anything of in life? Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's important to put things in perspective. Because sometimes where Charlie Kirk said, "Oh, white privilege never exists," okay, no, I'm like that. Also, is not true. White privilege has existed, but it is no longer relevant in this day and age. That's the
Yeah.
correct answer. Because when you had racial segregation in the South, where like some states literally implement laws to make you a second class citizen, that's even worse than white privilege. That's the apartheid. That's what happened
Yeah.
in South Africa.
Yeah.
So white privilege has existed. Today, absolutely not. It is no longer relevant. And I'm taking my own example to back what I'm saying. I am originally from Ivory Coast. I have an accent, as you hear me speaking. As French is my first language.
Yeah.
Those things did not prevent me from getting into the publishing industry. As a matter of fact, what I'm going to say is not to boast myself or anything, but I believe to be arguably the only Ivorian owning a publishing company in the United States, especially publishing intellectual books. I've not seen any person from Ivory Coast doing what I'm
Hmm.
doing right now.
Yeah.
The publishing industry is dominated by whites. I've never seen a white person say you're not allowed to get into it. There are no laws saying that I'm not allowed to get into it. So, oh,
Yeah.
what's the privilege here? If you want to get into an industry and it's for example, the finance industry is an industry that is dominated by whites, especially like hedge funds, financial markets. That's why whites are rich because they get into those industries. It's not rocket science. That's why I
Yeah.
said, like, I wrote a book called, I don't know if I have it here, but if I do, I share it with you. It's called Black Culture and Generational Poverty. And there was one chapter where I talk about black people's recalcitrance to get into financial market, especially the stock market. If you notice, black people, for example, when it comes to assets, they all love real estate. Oh, real estate investing, rental property. But when you look at whites, almost all whites own stocks. It's
Hmm.
easy to own them. You can liquidate them real quick. Look at hedge fund managers. They're all white.
Yeah.
There are no laws saying you have to be white to own a hedge fund. No. It's just that whites understand stocks. So they get into it. When you look at the data, the when you look at the data by race, the race that owns the most stocks in the United States are white. There's
Yeah.
no law saying blacks, Asians are not allowed to own stocks. It's just that white people understand how the stock market works. So in my book, the reason why I'm saying is because in my book, I said black people need to get into the stock market. It's because the stock market it's more like intangible. It's something you see on the screen. Okay, when we didn't have like gadgets like this before, like back in the days, you have this piece of paper, this
Yeah.
stock certificate saying, you own a piece of a company. It was weird compared to real estate, or when it's like physical, you can touch, you feel it.
Yeah.
So black people have been always skeptical of the stock market. But the stock market is why a lot of white people are rich. It's not because they're white, it's because they understand financial markets. So it's important for black people to get into financial markets, get
Yeah.
into it and compete with them. No one is going to say no. There's a reason why white people make money in the oil industry, in the banking industry, because they get into those industries. If you want to increase your wealth as a community, get into those industries. But you're not going to
Yeah.
increase your wealth by complaining that the wealth gap is large because of slavery. You own nothing. It's not about that. It's about understanding how industries work and then learn about them and get into them to get a piece of the pie. That's it. That's why
Yeah.
all hedge fund managers, for example, in the financial industries, they're all white and they're especially male. Right? It's not
Yeah.
just white, especially male, but like white males.
Yeah. I mean, there are historical. What happened in history does have an effect on the present, I think. like if you did have laws that prevented black people from getting into certain industries, once you change that law, it's not like things change overnight and the roles are reversed or made more even or anything like that. And same thing for like with hedge funds and stuff like that. It's like if white people have historically dominated those industries, it's not like if there's a discrepancy today,
Mhm.
it doesn't mean racism is the reason for that today, like
Yeah.
current racism.
Mhm.
Maybe racism in the past had some influence on it, but currently, like the opportunity exists. And
Yeah.
that's basically what you're saying about publishing is like you're the only Ivorian.
Yeah.
Did I say
Ivorian.
that?
Yep.
The only Ivorian
Mhm.
in the US who owns a publishing company. And that doesn't mean other Ivorians can't.
Yeah.
It just means that like it hasn't been pursued by many, and
Exactly.
like you still have the opportunity.
Exactly. And that's what I'm pretty much referring to blacks and financial industry specifically. Of course, yes, it's an industry. There's a reason why blacks are mainly in the entertainment business. That is the
Hmm.
main industry that blacks are pretty much concentrated. So entertainment and sports,
Yeah,
right? So these are the two major industries. Because and the reason why it makes sense is because back in the days opportunities were limited. So blacks believed that those were the only two industries
yeah,
where they can thrive. And that's fair. But today we live in a day and age where we need to expand our horizons too. Because if we keep thinking that entertainment and sports are the only two ways, then we will limit our potential to actually close the wealth gap. The way to actually close the wealth gap between black and white is by expanding into other industries. There are plenty of industries that are up for grabs, but we just don't go in there. Or
yeah,
if black go, it's like one, it's like they're very dispersed instead of
yeah,
going there as groups, right? So, because for example, when you look at Jewish people, they go in groups, for example, into the financial industry because that's why they know. Why they know this? Because back in the days, they were not allowed to own land and stuff. That's why you never see Jewish into agriculture. And so they got into banking, and bankers back in the day, they were like, it was like a trashy job. It was a very
yeah,
demeaning, oh, it was a very demeaning occupation. But today, Jewish people understood that finance is what controls society, and they have a very good understanding of how to build wealth. So if there were laws preventing them from getting to one industry, they say, you know what, we're going to move into another industry. We're not going to cry about it.
yeah,
So it is important for blacks today, especially for black because I'm black, so I'm not speaking about that race specifically. It's important for them today to understand to expand their horizons and not be clustered into that cycle of you know entertainment and sports are the only two ways for us to succeed in life. It's not true. It's uh, we need to be more curious. We need to get into other industry. We need to get into finance. We need to get into technology. We need to get into media. There are many industries we need to get into in order to reduce the wealth gap. But we're not going to do it if we're still attached to if we're still attached to the past. I understand the past plays a role. I agree, but we cannot let the past define us as
yeah.
individuals because we have the power to make decisions because we are individuals.
It seems like entertainment and sports are problematic, like especially problematic because they're so the bar to actually become a professional in those fields is so high
Absolutely.
that if you have a ton of people aiming for it, not only is the bar high, but it doesn't lead other directions. Like if you are have your eyes set on being a chemist and it doesn't work out, you have an academic background that can lead in many different directions.
Absolutely.
If you're a chemist and you decide the financial market is somewhere you want to pursue, like you're pretty set up to go in that direction,
Yeah,
because like even though there's not a ton of overlap, you have that mental acuity
yeah,
to go over there. But if you're pursuing sports and entertainment, there's just, you're typically not becoming an academic in your pursuit of sports. You know, like sports dominates your life. You, if you go to college and play sports, like even then, the sport is going to be what dominates your life. If you're on a scholarship, it's like you're there to play sports. You're not actually there to learn,
right.
even though they try to say you're there to learn, but it's all bullshit.
Yeah, we
Like
all know
you're just there to play
you're
sports.
basically there to you're only good at that, and
Yeah,
to me like to me it's to me it's insulting. I don't think black people are only good at sports, and people
yeah,
should not think that way. Oh yeah, it's like being like a it's like being like a horse race, like a racehorse. You're right, like, you're only good at that thing. That's why we
yeah,
put you in that box. That's what you're good for, and that's why I always say that black people should get into more intellectual activities. Like they should learn about they should really expand their horizons, because that's how they're going um, to make a place for themselves in this economy. Because sports and entertainment, you are limiting yourself. Sure, entertainment works for some people, like for example Diddy, who became extremely wealthy. I mean, now he's in trouble for being a shitty human being. Pardon my
yeah,
language, but if he was not a crappy human being, he was just a media like a music mogul. He was basically a billionaire. Sure, like
yeah.
he used music. 50 Cent did the same. You know, it's very crowded, and we need to go beyond those industries.
Well, yeah, and I think the people like 50 Cent, he doesn't come off as like a genius or anything, I think, in interviews or anything like that. But obviously, he has a business acumen that's well above average.
Absolutely.
So did Diddy, to the extent what the stuff that he did that was legitimate. He definitely had a good business acumen there.
Absolutely.
And I think that's where, people see that and they say, "Oh, entertainment is the place to be, or sports is the place to be." And like, I don't love LeBron James, but he's a good businessman.
Yeah.
Uh, Michael Jordan was a great businessman. Magic Johnson, great businessman.
Yeah.
Like, these are athletes that it's like, yeah, they're athletes, but they made their money in
In
business,
business. Yeah.
not just the sport. So
Yeah.
like, and we see people go into sports and go broke all the time.
Yeah.
So the sport alone is not going to be the future for anyone to some degree.
Some
Granted,
degree.
like if you make 100 million, as long as you're not dumb, you should be able to make that last your
Unless you're
lifetime
Mike
at least.
Tyson.
Yeah.
Dude made 400 million and blew all of it away. Oh
Oh,
my God. How can you be that stupid? But, anyways.
yeah. You know, Tyson's funny because that's somebody who I never expected to be in my 40s or in my late 30s hearing philosophical insights from that man.
Right.
But yeah, that's some deep stuff, and it's like,
Right.
that's that's cool. That's a guy who's lived through some shit, you
Right.
know. So, but yeah, what is the significance of Thomas Sowell? Like he's discussed as like a black economist. So like, is that where his fame is, or is it his specific insights that were like more revolutionary? Like, is it because he was one of the few prominent black economists, or is it because of what he actually taught?
It's both, especially a black economist who is not, uh, who doesn't follow the black dogma.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
That's where the key point is that he's a black economist who's a conservative or libertarian. Usually, black people, they tend to be more socialist, always left wing, but he was not, and his writings always focus on emphasizing methodological individualism rather than holism. So methodological individualism is the approach that societal phenomena are the results of individuals' motivations and choices.
Mm.
Holism is the contrary. It's more that Societal phenomena are the results of groups. It's that you focus more on the group than the individuals. And so, why Thomas Sowell, the reason why Thomas Sowell is appreciated by a lot of people is because the stuff he actually talks about are not revolutionary. That's the thing. And they became revolutionary because of the nonsensical things that have started to dominate society. Thomas Sowell talks about common sense. When you read his books, it's pure common sense. For
Mm.
example, he talks about the power of geography and how geography is a factor that actually contributes to wealth or income inequality. He says there are some places, if you were born to or if you live there, the chances that you actually become wealthy, it's pretty much is zero to non-existent,
Mm.
because where you live, because those places do not have the resources for you to create wealth. For example, when you think of the Incas and the Mayas, right, in South America, they live in the mountains. And those places there, um, they don't offer the resources for you to create wealth compared to if you live close to the ocean or if you live close to rivers,
Yeah.
especially navigable rivers, not just rivers, because there's some part of rivers that you cannot use to create commerce. And that's what he talks about. For example,
Mm.
he talks about how why Japanese became so advanced because of their ability to adapt, their ability to copy other cultures, take what is good from those cultures and adapt to it.
Yeah.
Right? So it's you say when I'm saying that you say, yeah, it makes sense. But that's what he talks about. But because we
Yeah.
live in such a nonsensical world today, we all see his writing as like groundbreaking. They're not groundbreaking at all. They're just common sense. It's all about logic. It's all about understanding basic things. And that's what Thomas Sowell offers. And that's why people appreciate him, because it's like, okay, he's one of the few men who still has his head and didn't
Yeah.
fall into the whole dogma of identity politics, of big government and stuff like that.
What made you decide? I mean, obviously, there's thousands and thousands of people you can choose to write a biography for. What made you choose Thomas Sowell? And your subtitle was "The Misunderstood Economist."
Yeah.
Uh, what what are the misunderstandings that people have about him?
Well, the misunderstanding is what I was basically saying is that he all he talks about are common sense things, but he's misunderstood because he does not abide by the dominant narrative, right?
Yeah.
That blacks are the victims, that government is here to help, that government spending is good, that affirmative action is necessary for blacks to have access to opportunities, and so those are the dominant. Now, those are the dominant stuff that people support, and Thomas Sowell says this is nonsense, and is misunderstood because people don't take the time to understand what he's trying to say. Because when you actually take the time to read him, to understand what he's talking about, you pretty much end up agreeing with him. Not that
Mm.
you agree with him on every single thing he says. Thomas Sowell is not God. Obviously, he has flaws too. Like some of his arguments are flawed, but overall, the stuff he's talking about makes sense. And he talked, like, for example, he talked about there's one thing I want to address is uh, gradual change versus revolutions. There's a reason why political revolutions never work. When you look at the French Revolution, there's the Bolshevik Revolution, the Cuban Revolution, the Cultural Revolution in China, and the list goes on. If you look at their outcomes, they all produce the same suboptimal results. It's more violence, more control, more totalitarianism. Let me take the French Revolution, for example. So the French got rid of the monarchy. They say the king was a totalitarian leader and blah, blah, blah. The Jacobins took over. What did they do? What happened was simply a change of political system not a change in the nature of power.
Yeah.
The nature of power was the same. It was this brutal, totalitarian, despotic power. But we moved from a monarchy to a republic. And under the first years of the republic, it was even more brutal. You have Robespierre cutting people's head like he's killing mosquitoes. It was bad.
Yeah.
It took literally five republics for France to have a stabilized political system. When you look at the Soviet Union, they had a bloody revolution. They killed Emperor Nicholas II. What happened? They created a totalitarian state with communism. And the same
Yeah.
happened with Cuba. Batista, he was a dictator. Fidel Castro and Che Guevara took him out of power to create another totalitarian state. And the list goes on. Same with Mao Zedong. And the list goes on. Compared to gradual change, Thomas Sowell believes that gradual change is the best way to actually implement change because revolutions are too brutal. The change is too much in your face. But when you want to implement reforms, you have to go step by step. You implement one reform and let people adapt to it, see how they
Mm.
react. Once they adapt to it, then you implement another reform and so on and so forth. But when you implement a set of reform all at once in people's face, they reject it. It doesn't
How
work.
do you how do you explain the American Revolution and its success, though? Like,
Sure.
how does yeah?
So the American Revolution was not a political revolution fundamentally. It was an economic revolution. Americans
Okay.
complain about taxes. They say that, okay, taxation without representation. They're like, okay, we're paying an enormous amount of taxes while we're not even represented in the motherland, in Great Britain. And that's not fair. So what they wanted was to create a system that will pretty much give them the power of self-determination. And when you look at the change was actually a change in the nature of power. Because at the time, Great Britain had Great Britain always had a monarchy, but they had an absolute monarchy. So in the US, they decide to change that by having a republic with three branches of government, right? Three branches of government, and no branch can supersede the other branch of government.
Mm.
One branch actually creates laws, the other one implements them, and the other one interprets them. In England, it wasn't like that. The king was almighty to the point that they had to create the Magna Carta to kind of
Yeah.
like check the king's power. So that's what the American Revolution was successful because, and it's something that happened gradually. It's called a revolution, sure, but it happened gradually. It didn't happen. It wasn't like a brutal revolution like the French Revolution. It was like it happened through a series of acts that led finally to the optimal outcome of creating a republic with three branches of government, having a president that doesn't have all the powers, right? He has to report to Congress, and the Supreme Court has to determine the constitutionality of his policies.
Mm. Okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of, I mean, does the fact that it was a foreign power that they revolted against, does that factor into?
That's a
Because all
good
the ones you
question.
mentioned, all the ones you mentioned, French, Soviet Union,
Yeah, they were all
uh,
within. They were all
all
yeah,
within.
they were
Yeah,
all within.
yeah.
Well, it could play a role. That's a good question. Let me try to phrase it in a certain way. So Alexander Hamilton, in fact, wanted to have an elected monarchy
Hmm.
in the US, right? Alexander Hamilton loved big government. And to
Yeah.
him, the best type of big government to have was either a president who is extremely powerful, right? Or a monarch who is elected and have the power of the monarch in England. So the fact that it was a foreign power that played a role, not necessarily because the culture was the same, because it was Anglo-Saxon culture, but it
Yeah.
was just on the other side of the Atlantic. I think it was more like that Americans were driven by a, a need to break away from the monarchy. They really wanted to have a system where there is no one man dominating the entire political system. They wanted like
Makes
the
sense.
political system to be based on branches of government rather than the men dominating the whole thing.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else about soul that's misunderstood generally?
Um, well, his approach to affirmative action and DEI, uh, even the fact that I believe he didn't win the Nobel Prize in economics, I think that's a tragedy. It's an academic
Mm,
tragedy because I believe he deserved it. The reason why they didn't give it to him, people say, is because he never published in 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 academic journals.
hmm.
Because but Tomaso never cared about academic journals. Like he write books because he wants to educate the public.
Yeah.
And when you read, like for example, when you read academic papers from economists, it's just mathematical gibberish. You have
Yeah.
no understanding. No, literally. I mean, I understand what they're saying, but the average American will not understand at all what the paper, all these econometric or statistical models are all about. And the Nobel Committee tried so hard to turn economics into a hard science. So basically, you cannot win, or it's virtually impossible to win the Nobel Prize in economics if you don't incorporate mathematics in your papers. And Thomas
Mm,
Sowell doesn't incorporate that. Like, if all of his books are prose, there's even no graph, no charts. It's just prose. It's just
hmm.
writing, logical
Yeah.
reasoning, explaining to you why the economy works the way it does. That's it.
Well, I think that's it's interesting because I think math does play into some economics. Obviously, like if you're dealing with trade and you have a trade discrepancy, like I remember being in an economics class and they kind of broke down trade and like how even if a country isn't as good of a producer at two different products, they can still trade with like the US, who's maybe producing at a
Mhm.
higher level those two different products, and you can make it work to the advantage of both countries. Like
Mhm.
stuff like that is pretty cool,
Yeah,
and
and
that takes some
I
math.
actually I agree with you. I think deep down, like mathematics is
Yeah.
necessary in the field of economics. The problem is what we call the Ricardian vice. The Ricardian vice is the use of mathematics for its own beauty rather
Mm,
than actually solving a problem.
yeah.
So economists now are more driven by using complex mathematics just to impress rather than offering practical solutions to the issues that they're actually addressing.
Well, and it also there's a great book, How to Lie with Statistics,
Yeah.
and they detail like the use of math and numbers gives an allure of authority that might not actually be there.
Yep.
And if you're using it, it's like, I think people will look at it and be like, I'm not going to check all this
Yeah.
math or anything
Exactly.
like that.
Yep.
But they did math, so they must be right.
Yep.
When in
Exactly.
reality, like, I mean, I think you and I agree Keynesian economists are wrong. And, they might be math dominant in their fields, but I don't think the math works out. And I'm not a mathematician. I use logic when I'm thinking about economics. And I'm not an economist by any means, but like I think I'm right on some things,
Hmm.
wrong on others.
Hmm.
But it's like I'm usually using logic.
Yeah.
Like, okay, if this happens, what happens next? And you don't actually need the mathematics of it to understand like logical
Oh yeah.
correlations and
Absolutely.
processes.
In fact, to
So
even expand on your argument, economists today use the math to gatekeeping people from questioning the rationale. That's it.
yeah.
So when you argue with an economist, he's going to say, "Oh, I'm a professional economist," and is going to bombard you with all sorts of papers filled with equations I say, my guy, you can use all the statistical models you want. What you're talking about makes no sense.
Yeah.
Period. And
I've had that line thrown at me. I'm an economist. I've been doing this for 20 years. And it's like,
oh yeah,
an appeal to authority isn't an argument to me. You better prove me wrong. Otherwise, you're still wrong.
exactly, absolutely, exactly. I even made a post about that on my Instagram. I think a few months ago. Like economists, professional economists, they always do that, and that's why, for example, right? People ask me, "Oh, Germinal, are you an economist?" I say, "Yes, I am," because I actually work in the field of economics. For today, for people to consider you an economist, you have to have a PhD. I said there is no law saying that I need to have a PhD to be an economist.
Yeah.
There's no law. Do you have to pass the bar exam to be a lawyer? Absolutely. Do you need to pass the board's examination to be a medical doctor? Absolutely. But there's no law saying that you need to have a PhD to be an economist. Most of the
Yeah.
Nobel winners are actually not professional, like they didn't have a PhD in economics to start with. Even uh, the first winner of the Nobel Prize in economics, his name is Jan Tinbergen. He's considered the father of econometrics. He had a PhD in physics.
Mm,
He had a PhD in
yeah.
physics. Telling Koopmans, another economist, he had a PhD in physics too.
Yeah.
And there's this Soviet mathematician. His name is Leonid Kantorovich. He had a degree in mathematics. He won the Nobel Prize for using linear programming. I can give you a
Mm,
list, like most of them don't even have PhD in economics.
yeah.
So there is no law saying, and economists, they always use that. They say, oh, you don't have a PhD in economics, don't even talk, I won't even waste my time with you. No, you're not going to waste your time with me because you know that I'll put you in check if we argue. Because what you're saying doesn't make sense. And we both know it doesn't make sense.
Well, yeah. I mean, and there is an aspect of economics and the field of economics and pursuing that academically that makes me wonder, okay, are you actually learning economics or are you learning a certain ideological viewpoint of economics? Because I think Keynesian economics isn't, it seems ideological more
It
than
is.
just anything else.
It
So it's
is.
like if you're going to school and part of your study of economics is to become, to absorb an ideology, I think it's probably better to come outside of that ideology to explore because like if you're in like part of being in an ideology is not questioning the ideology. And that's the pushback you get from economists. It's like, no, like no, you're wrong. This is what I learned. And it's like, yeah, but you learning something doesn't mean it's true. Like
Yep.
that doesn't, that's not an argument, you know?
You know,
So,
RT, in
yeah.
fact, I always tell people if you actually want to learn economics, do not study economics in school.
Mm,
Because, especially at the graduate level, what they do is that they train you as a mathematician. They don't really focus on the history of economic theories. They don't really dive deep into why those theories exist. What they focus on is to train you as a statistician or as a mathematician. So when you
yeah.
do economics in grad school, they, even if you want to apply to economics in grad school, they will say they will require you to take a certain number of classes in calculus, because that's pretty much all you're going to do, doing calculus statistics. But you're doing all these quantitative analysis for what? What about
Yeah.
the actual history of the theory? What about the theory itself? What are we testing? And of course, so they train those people, so those people become useful idiots because they're very, I mean, they're smart guys. They're very, they have like technical skills when it comes to mathematics and stuff, but you're testing the wrong things. There's a reason why central banks always mess up. The people who works
Yeah.
at central banks, they're very smart guys. I read their papers. If you read the papers of central bankers, the way they develop the mathematical model to determine the quantity theory, the level of like the money supply, how much they should put in, it's extremely advanced, and yet they mess up all the time. But they do that so that you will not ask questions, because the math is
Yeah.
there to gatekeep you from questioning.
Well, and models, I don't think a lot of people realize the extent to which models are used in academia. Like models were used to claim how many lives the COVID vaccine saved. It's like these are models. They're not actually like going out in the field and like interviewing people and collecting data and analyzing retrospectively. They're using a model and saying, okay, based on our assumptions, and all models are based on
Yep,
assumptions, this is how many lives will be saved. And it's the same thing with economics. Like
absolutely,
there's a bunch of assumptions. So if you're wrong on one of those assumptions, your model might be crap. It might be worthless, you know?
absolutely, yep.
So
And that's what Tomaso has always criticized, and that's what they never gave him the prize for. The prize has always eluded him because he never engaged in mathematics. He never bothered publishing with academic journals like the Quarterly Journal of Economics, or or Econometrica, all these big journals. Tomaso just wanted to educate the public. He says to him, like, it's better to write a book that will be accessible to everyone, that everyone can understand, rather than writing a paper, like a 20-page paper full of equations that no one understands.
yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, Stephen Hawking was like that with physics, astrophysics. Like he wrote accessible material that, I mean, he was an astrophysicist too, but he wrote accessible books that anybody could digest and be like, oh, I'm not an astrophysicist, but I can understand a little bit of what he's saying. And
Yeah,
I think that's the hallmark of a good educator.
yeah,
Somebody who can, you can be the smartest person in the world and understand things at a level no one else understands. But if you can't convey that to other people,
absolutely,
it's meaningless, you know?
absolutely,
So,
absolutely,
Germinal, it's been so fun talking to you as
absolutely.
always.
Thank you very much, Artie.
Before we wrap up, do you want to just tell listeners where they can buy your books, where they can learn more about you, find you on Instagram, X, anywhere else, and anything else you want to share?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, all my books are on Amazon, and for those who are interested in also purchasing the books of the authors who publish with GGV Publishing, it's also on the company's website and on Amazon. So you guys can find those books there. People can find me on Instagram. That's the social media I am the most active on, but I'm also on LinkedIn and Twitter, or X, as that's how they call it, and Facebook. Yeah, pretty much that's, yeah, social media and the website of my company. That's where I am.
Awesome. Well, Germinal, it's been amazing talking to you.
Absolutely. Thank
I'm
you.
I'm very happy to have brought you back here because I've been looking forward to have another conversation with you, and hopefully we have more.
Absolutely, yeah, this one went really well. We went over 2 hours, almost
Yeah,
2 hours and a half. It wasn't script. It was just, great conversations the way Joe Rogan does his. So I
yeah,
actually appreciate that. I think it's even like better to have a conversation like this than having like a set of questions already. And
yeah.
no, I definitely enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to come back again whenever
Yeah.
you want to have me.
Awesome. Thanks, Germinal. It's been
Thanks, Harvey.
great.
Appreciate it.